and I've been broke, $0, sleeping on my sister's couch 3 times in my life.
Richard Rawlings has had tons of cars, from Mustangs to Ferraris. But let's be honest, not all of them were winners. Some turned out to be money pits, major letdowns, or just plain frustrating. Let's count down the 5 cars he hated the most. Number 1, the Datsun that burned. Richard Rawlings, the fast-talking, deal-making face of Fast and Loud, has seen it all, from barn finds buried in rust to million-dollar classics rolling across auction floors. He's known for his passion for cars, big engines, rare finds, and bold builds. That's his world. But not every car tells a story of victory. Some carry heartbreak. And one car in particular, a sleek, snarling 1975 Datsun 280Z, became one of the biggest letdowns in the history of Gas Monkey Garage. Richard doesn't hate cars easily. He respects the grind, but when a car gives more trouble than thrill, his patience burns fast. That's exactly what happened with the Datsun 280Z. This wasn't just any Z car. It was supposed to be special, a tribute to Japanese performance wrapped in American custom style. The 1975 Datsun 280Z had potential. It had sleek lines, a 2.8-liter inline-6 engine, Bosch fuel injection, and the kind of lightweight body that made it a favorite among sports car fans. It was a step up from the 260Z and was designed to keep the performance strong while following new U.S. emission laws. To Richard, this car was a chance to show what Gas Monkey Garage could do with a classic Japanese sports car. They had built muscle cars, hot rods, even exotic imports, but this build was something different. It was personal. The team poured their hearts into it. From day one, the build was wild. The garage tore it down and rebuilt it from the frame up, adding custom flares, a fresh paint job that shimmered in the light, and a stance that screamed power. But not everything went smoothly. One tiny part nearly killed the entire project, a faulty sensor, and that sensor caused endless delays. The car wouldn't run right. Power came and went. Fuel issues flared up. The schedule was tight. Fast and Loud was filming, the team was on deadline, and the pressure was crushing. Richard was furious. In the world of TV builds, time is money, and every mistake costs both. That little sensor became a symbol of everything that could go wrong during a build, but somehow the team pulled it off. The Datsun roared to life, ready to make its debut, and not just anywhere, it was headed to SEMA, the biggest car event in the world. The Gas Monkey crew rolled the 280Z onto the stage in Las Vegas. It was low, mean, and powerful. Crowds loved it. Photos were taken, hands were shaken. For a moment, all the pain was worth it. Then came the tragedy. Not long after the show, disaster struck. A fire broke out. Whether it was in the garage, during transport, or at a private location, the details were never fully clear. But what everyone did know was this. The 1975 Datsun 280Z was gone, burned, lost forever. Richard was heartbroken. All that time, all that effort, all that money, and it went up in smoke. He had trusted the car, given it a stage, and in return, it broke his heart twice. First with delays, and then in flames. To this day, Richard Rawlings doesn't talk about that car much. He's moved on to pre-war classics and high-dollar builds that grow in value. But deep down, you get the feeling that one corner of Gas Monkey Garage still remembers the 280Z, not for how it lived, but for how it died. Number 2, the 1976 Jaguar XJ12L. Among the many cars Richard Rawlings has owned, one stood out for its quiet class and powerful heart, a 1976 Jaguar XJ12 L Series 2 sedan. It wasn't flashy like a Lamborghini or muscular like a '69 Camaro, but it had something else: elegance, rarity, and a touch of British charm. With only 12,000 miles on the clock, this long-wheelbase Jaguar had clearly been babied for most of its life. It was clean, mostly original, and powered by a mighty 5.3-liter V12 engine, the kind of engine you'd expect in an exotic, not a four-door luxury cruiser. This model, the XJ12L, was a special one in Jaguar's history. First introduced in the early 1970s, the XJ Series 2 brought new styling changes like raised bumpers and a smaller grille, updates made to meet U.S. safety regulations. The L in the name stood for long wheelbase, meaning it had more space in the rear, perfect for chauffeured rides. But the real star was under the hood, a fuel-injected 5.3-liter V12 producing around 244 horsepower. Back then, this car was part of a bold move by Jaguar. It was the only mass-produced V12 sedan in the world. That meant smooth power, a whisper quiet ride, and high-end performance few other sedans could match. Inside, the car oozed luxury. Leather seats, walnut fascias, and a full set of gauges that made it feel more like a cockpit than a dashboard. It had power windows, power brakes, power steering, and even anti-dive suspension, designed to keep the nose from dipping during hard braking. It was the kind of car that whispered class and refinement, the opposite of what Gas Monkey Garage usually built. So why did Richard Rawlings let it go? In 2022, Rawlings auctioned off part of his collection, and the Jaguar XJ12L was on the list. While many expected the rare V12 luxury sedan to draw strong bids, especially given its low mileage, it sold for just $10,750. That was a bit of a surprise, considering Haggerty.com had listed a good condition estimate of $12,100. While close in value, it still meant the car underperformed at auction. Well, according to car experts who looked it over, the car had some corrosion and cosmetic issues. It wasn't falling apart, but it wasn't pristine either. It needed light restoration to bring it up to top condition, maybe a fresh paint touch-up, some minor rust repair, or detailing to really make it shine. In other words, it was a solid car with big potential, but it just didn't sparkle enough on auction day. Richard Rawlings didn't get rid of this car out of pure hate. In fact, with its low mileage and mostly original condition, it was clearly well maintained. But not every car steals his heart. This was likely one he respected but didn't feel connected to. Rawlings often reshapes his collection. If a car's value isn't climbing or it doesn't match his current vision, it's out the door. Though the car didn't fetch top dollar, it's the kind of car that just needs the right owner, someone who sees its beauty and potential. Rawlings let it go, but in doing so, he gave someone else a chance to restore and enjoy a piece of Jaguar's finest work. Number 3. The 1978 Ford Fairmont. Not every car that rolled into Gas Monkey Garage earned Richard Rawlings' respect. Some were just too plain, too frustrating, or simply too far off from what he truly cared about. The 1978 Ford Fairmont fell into that category. While it may have had potential on paper, Richard never clicked with it. In fact, by the time it left the garage, it was clear he didn't like the car at all. The story started like many fast and loud builds, a surprise find on eBay. Richard stumbled across a chrome-covered Fairmont, and at first he thought, why not? It was cheap. It was weird, and maybe the Gas Monkey crew could turn it into something wild enough to flip for a big payday. But the 1978 Fairmont wasn't a car Richard had ever dreamed of owning. It was a basic family car, the kind of thing you drove because you had no other choice. It had no real muscle, no style that turned heads, and no collector value. It was built for economy, not excitement. Even though it was the first car on the Ford Fox platform, a chassis later used in Mustangs and Thunderbird, the Fairmont itself felt more like a blank sheet of paper than a real car. Richard even joked on Fast and Loud that the car was so ugly it might scare away horsepower. Still, they moved forward with the build. In Season 1, Episode 11, titled Fast and Furious Fairmont, the crew went all in. Under Rawlings' direction, they ripped out the old engine and dropped in a 5.0-liter V8 from a 1986 Mustang, added a 5-speed manual transmission, and bolted on a 4.10 ratio 8.8-inch rear axle. The suspension was upgraded with Hotch's trailing arms, KYB shocks, and an Aerospace Components 5-lug disc brake conversion. Inside, they added racing seats and a roll cage. To top it off, they wrapped the car in mirror-like chrome, turning the bland Fairmont into something that at least looked wild. But here's the thing. Even as the crew worked hard to make the car special, Richard's attitude toward the build stayed cold. Unlike other projects where he beamed with pride or bragged about the flips, with the Fairmont he seemed distant, just going through the motions. To him, it was more of a goofy stunt than a serious investment. And somehow, he was right to be skeptical. Even after sinking more than $40,000 into the build, the car ended up selling on eBay for just $16,549, a big hit by Gas Monkey standards. Richard Rawlings wasn't too happy about it. While he admitted the project was fun to work on, he also made it clear it wasn't something he cared to keep around. In fact, he once flat out said he didn't love the car. "This was one of those builds we tackled just because we could, not because we should," he explained. That pretty much said it all. For Richard, the Fairmont never earned its place in the garage. It didn't have the history of a Mustang or the class of a Jaguar. It didn't turn a huge profit, and worse, it didn't excite him. While the crew might have had some fun building a drift-ready sleeper, Richard saw it as a distraction, a flashy experiment that didn't deliver. The sale of the car was more of a relief than a farewell. He sold it quickly, didn't make much noise about it afterward, and never showed any interest in doing another Fairmont build again. While he's known for loving all kinds of vehicles, from rare Ferraris to classic American muscle, the Fairmont felt like the one that just never fit. Later on, when Richard sold off a chunk of his car collection to shift toward higher-end builds, it became clear he was moving away from oddball, low-value projects. The Fairmont was among the cars that helped him decide to go in a different direction. It wasn't just that the car lost money, it was that he never cared for it in the first place. So, while Fast and Loud fans might remember the chrome-wrapped Fairmont as a bold and strange build, Richard Rawlings likely remembers it as a build he regretted. One that looked cool on screen but left him cold behind the scenes. And for a man who lives and breathes cars, that says a lot. Some cars fire you up, and some cars wear you down. For Richard Rawlings, the 1978 Ford Fairmont was the latter. It looked wild, drove hard, and had all the bells and whistles, but deep down, he never liked it. It was a car without character, a build without passion. In selling it off, he didn't just free up garage space. He closed the door on a car that, no matter how shiny it looked, never truly belonged at Gas Monkey Garage. Number 4. The 1966 Ford Mustang GT 289 Coupe, a classic that couldn't win him over Reference Link. Richard Rawlings has had his hands on hundreds of cars, some rare, some wild, some just plain cool. But not every car that rolled through the Gas Monkey Garage earned his love. The 1966 Ford Mustang GT 289 Coupe should have been a highlight. It had all the ingredients: American muscle, clean lines, a solid V8, and the legendary GT badge. But for Richard, it never clicked. Let's be real. The Mustang GT 289 Coupe is a piece of history. Built at the end of the Mustang's original first-generation run, the 1966 model kept the same sleek body lines that made the car an icon. It had a 289 cubic inch V8 under the hood, a 4-speed manual transmission, fog lights, dual exhaust, and all the features that defined the GT trim. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. But if Richard Rawlings respected this pony car, he sure didn't show it much. Unlike other builds he talked up on Fast and Loud or bragged about on social media, the '66 Mustang never really got his full attention. Sure, it showed up on his other show, Garage Rehab, and yes, it got some upgrades, a new interior, fresh brakes, engine work, suspension touch-ups. But those were more like chores than passion projects, the kind of work you do just to boost resale. It's hard not to notice how little he hyped it up. There were no big promos, no proud Instagram posts, no long-winded stories about how much the car meant to him. It was clear, this Mustang wasn't close to his heart. And when it came time to sell, he let it go without a second thought. The sale price told the rest of the story. The 1966 Ford Mustang GT Coupe, upgraded, clean, and with known history, sold for just $26,450. That's not just low, it's a letdown. According to Haggerty, the fastback version in good condition can bring nearly $60,000. And while the coupe isn't as rare, it's still a classic, worth much more, especially with GT trim and a solid V8. But why did it go so cheap? Because Rawlings didn't care. He likely saw it as just another car to move, something that didn't fit his evolving style or brand. Gas Monkey Garage was moving toward flashier builds, exotic customs, and high-dollar pre-war projects. The Mustang was too common, too quiet, and too basic for the empire he was building. Some might say the car deserved better, and maybe it did. A Mustang like that, one with soul and a legacy, should have been a centerpiece. But instead, it sat in the background, overshadowed by other showboats in Richard's lineup. No love, no spotlight, just a clean it up and sell it kind of attitude. Richard Rawlings is a businessman first. He cares about value, market trends, and brand image. The Mustang didn't make the cut, not flashy enough, not rare enough, and definitely not exciting enough for the Gas Monkey spotlight. But for the next driver, that Mustang might just find the appreciation it never got from Gas Monkey. Number 5. Richard Rawlings and the Zimmer Quicksilver. Among the hundreds of wild, loud, and fast machines that passed through Richard Rawlings' garage, the 1986 Zimmer Quicksilver stands out for being, well, different. Very different. Built on a Pontiac Fiero platform, but dressed up like a car from a completely different world, the Zimmer Quicksilver was a neoclassic luxury coupe, a car that borrowed styling cues from elegant cars of the past and fused them with the wild flair of the 1980s. With just 170 ever made, it was rare. And with only 500 miles on the clock, Rawlings' example was even rarer. Built between 1984 and 1988, the Quicksilver took the guts of a Pontiac Fiero, including its mid-mounted V6 engine, transmission, and chassis, and stretched it out into a long, sleek luxury machine. Zimmer Motor Cars, a small company in Florida, was known for building neoclassic cars, vehicles that looked old school in their style but used modern drivetrains. The Quicksilver featured a long nose, pop-up headlights, thick chrome bumpers, and a grille that looked like it belonged on a 1930s Grand Tourer. Inside, it was decked out with leather seats, wood grain trim, and high-end touches, giving it a sort of Cadillac meets space age vibe. But this car wasn't exactly everyone's cup of tea. The Zimmer Quicksilver is one of those cars that you either love for its bold weirdness or scratch your head at. It was a niche car, built for a niche crowd, wealthy buyers who wanted something luxurious, unique, and flashy. It didn't have race car power or off-road toughness, but it certainly had presence. Some called it gaudy, others called it futuristic, but one thing's for sure, it never blended into the background. When Richard Rawlings got his hands on one in 2020, it was a pristine example. Under 500 miles, untouched by time, and nearly museum grade. It was part of a batch of unique cars he bought to grow and diversify his collection. But in 2022, he sold it off at auction for $24,000, a very tidy profit considering that another Quicksilver with 14,000 miles sold that same year for only $12,750. So did Rawlings dislike the Zimmer? Not exactly, but it also seems like he didn't feel a strong connection to it either. Unlike some of the classic American muscle cars Rawlings personally restored, drove, and featured on his shows, the Quicksilver came and went without much fanfare. It wasn't the kind of car you'd see thundering down the road or turning heads with raw power. It was more of a collector's curiosity, a car you show at a concours event, not tear down a drag strip. And for a guy who loves roaring engines and high-octane excitement, the Zimmer may have simply not lit that fire. Richard even sold it during a larger auction of over 20 vehicles from his personal collection, part of what he called a garage cleanse. Reports from Hot Cars and MSN suggest the auction helped Rawlings free up capital and refocus on new ventures. In his own words, he wanted to build a leaner, meaner collection, moving away from cars whose values were starting to soften, including many quirky 80s and 90s models like the Quicksilver. The 1986 Zimmer Quicksilver remains one of the strangest and most fascinating cars to pass through Gas Monkey Garage. A car that looked like a dream from a different era, driven only 500 miles and sold with just enough mystery to leave fans wondering what might have been if it had stayed. Another car that gave Richard reasons to dislike it is the 1948 Chevrolet Fleetmaster. It all started at an auction. Richard had his eye on the Fleetmaster, a shiny, curvy car with that smooth post-World War II style. Built for the 1946 to 1948 model years, the Fleetmaster was a symbol of America's return to normal after the war. With a 216.5 cubic inch inline-six engine and a 3-speed manual transmission, it wasn't a speed demon, but it had charm. It came in a range of body styles like the sedan, sport coupe, and even a convertible. It was the kind of car that turned heads, not because it was fast, but because it was a classic. But when Richard bought this one, things didn't go as planned. Right after the sale, he looked over the car and realized it wasn't nearly in as good shape as he hoped. The interior needed work. The body had flaws. The engine didn't sound great. In one scene from Fast and Loud, Richard didn't hide his feelings. He called the car pretty disgusting and admitted it was a bad buy. Still, Richard isn't one to give up easily. He saw potential in the Fleetmaster. While some people might have pushed it into a corner and forgotten about it, Richard had a different plan. He wanted to turn this tired old car into something mean and eye-catching, a hot rod. Not just any hot rod, but what he called a pissed-off hot rod. The team at Gas Monkey Garage went to work. They upgraded the engine, fixed the body, cleaned up the interior, and gave it a sharp new look. The goal was to keep the classic 1940s shape, but add some serious attitude and performance. It took time, effort, and a lot of money. Richard had poured $22,500 into restoring the car. Then, on the auction day, the Fleetmaster rolled onto the auction stage, bright lights shining, the crowd watching, and Richard standing nearby with his usual confident look. At first, the bidding looked promising, but soon it flatlined. The price barely moved. Richard's expression changed fast, his grin disappeared, and he stood there with his arms folded, clearly frustrated. When the final bid came in at $11,750, it was a major blow. He had lost nearly $11,000. Right after the auction, Richard didn't hide how he felt. He told the winning bidder, "You just scored the deal of a lifetime." And he wasn't joking. Later, the lucky buyer admitted in an interview that he'd simply been at the right place at the right time. Meanwhile, Richard was left shaking his head. What made the loss sting even more was that he'd truly believed in the car. This wasn't just another quick flip. He saw potential in the Fleetmaster and invested serious time and money to turn it into something special. Unfortunately, the crowd that day didn't see what he saw, and that led to frustration for him.